Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. I will look for you. I will find you.
Neutral citation number, 2012 EWHC 503, admin. Case No. CO/7039/2010. In the High Court of Justice. Queen's Bench Division. Administrative Court. Royal Courts of Justice Strand, London, WC2A2LL. July 3, 2012. BEFORE. Mr. Justice Meeting. Between Professor John Walker Smith Appellant and General Medical Counsel Respondent Mr. Stephen Miller QC and Ms. Andrea Lindsay Strugo. Instructed by Eastwood Solicitors, for the Appellant Miss Joanna Glynn QC and Mr. Christopher Meller. Instructed by Field Fisher Waterhouse LLP, for the Respondent. Hearing dates, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th and February 17th, 2012. HTML version of judgment. Crown Copyright. Mr. Justice Meeting. Procedural history. Child 8. 125 Child 8, the only girl of the Lancet children, was born on July 6, 1993. Early general practice notes record that she had a congenital heart disease, which was corrected surgically, and was developmentally delayed. MMR vaccine was given on January 27, 1995. She had a grand malconvulsion in February 1995, 2 weeks later. She was never the same again. She had frequent diarrhea, but ate well and gained weight. On February 13, 1995 she was admitted to North Tyneside General Hospital, to investigate her febrile convulsion in association with gastroenteritis. No neurological abnormalities other than developmental delay were found. She was readmitted to the same hospital on November 1, 1995 because she was screaming constantly and had diarrhea. The ward round note stated, "Toddler diarrhea." On December 1, 1995 MRS Clydesdale, a consultant clinical psychologist, raised the possibility of an autistic type of disorder, which she discounted. She was still screaming and experiencing diarrhea in early 1996. On May 13, 1996, Dr. Howlesby, a consultant pediatrician at North Tyneside General Hospital, noted some improvement in her screaming and thought that she had toddler's diarrhea. She still lacks speech. Similar conclusions were reached at a special needs team meeting on June 5, 1996. On August 21, 1996, Heather Gate, a senior dietitian, noted her mother's report that child 8 experienced pain on moving her bowels, that her stools were often very mucosy and sometimes foul-smelling. Ms. Gate thought that testing for malabsorption of fat should be undertaken. On September 13, 1996 Dr. Howlesby expressed the view to Child 8's general practitioner that it was extremely unlikely that MMR was the cause of her problems. 126 On October 3, 1996, Dr. Jelly, Child 8's general practitioner, wrote to Dr. Wakefield stating that her mother had told him that a referral letter was required from him to accept Child 8 into your investigation program, which he understood to be into the possible effects of vaccine damage and her gastrointestinal symptoms. On October 9, 1996 Dr. Wakefield wrote to Professor Walker Smith enclosing details of Child 8 who was referred to me with secondary autism and bowel problems. On December 3, 1996, Professor Walker Smith wrote to Child 8's mother telling her that he had arranged for her admission for investigations, beginning with a colonoscopy, on January 19, 1996, sick. 127 The clinical admission note of January 19, 1997 identified the problem as developmental delay, diarrhea since last 1.5 years. A full clinical history included noting that she deteriorated dramatically after her febrile convulsion, 2 weeks after the MMR vaccine, since when she had developed screaming attacks and diarrhea. Although her behavior had improved in the last few months, she still did not speak. Dr. Thompson's colonoscopy report of January 20, 1997 recorded a normal appearance, except for mild increase in lymph node tissue in the terminal ileum. He noted, against plan, Dr. Wakefield protocol. The histology report noted minimal inflammatory changes. Child 8 was seen by Dr. Berlowitz, who reported to Professor Walker-Smith on January 28, 1997 that he did not think an autistic spectrum diagnosis was merited, but was left wondering whether she had a post-vaccination encephalitis. Child 8 was discharged from the Royal Free Hospital on 28 January 1997, but it was not until November 27, 1997 that Dr. Casson sent a discharge summary to her general practitioner. He stated that the results of the investigations conducted are not indicative of marked ongoing inflammation. The only letter from Professor Walker-Smith is one dated April 14, 1998 to Dr. Jelly recommending a therapeutic trial of an anti-inflammatory drug. 128 A striking feature of Child 8's case is that there was no outpatient assessment before admission. Professor Walker-Smith's explanation, which he did not claim was based on memory of the particular case, was that a precedent had been set by the case of Child 4, with whose admission he had nothing to do, as the panel found, who had also been referred by the same general practice in the Northeast, and that for pragmatic reasons this far from ideal decision must have been taken. He emphasized that, on admission on January 19, 1997, Child 8 would have to be assessed by a consultant, in this case Dr. Thompson, before colonoscopy and other investigations were undertaken. He supported the decision to do so, because of the reported symptoms, screaming, abdominal pain and bouts of very loose stools, all associated with a behavioral disorder. Dr. Miller supported his view, stating that the long-standing symptoms clearly required investigation and that, in the light of experience gained in the cases of other children, colonoscopy was a reasonable clinical step. Professor Rutter and Professor Booth considered that the referral was research-driven. Professor Booth also stated that the decision to admit without a prior outpatient assessment and inflammatory markers was not justified, and that, in the absence of other supportive pieces of evidence inflammatory bowel disease was present, colonoscopy was not clinically indicated. 129 The determinative findings of the panel were as follows. 2.1 AU subjected Child 8 to a program of investigations as part of the project referred to at paragraphs 2b and 2c above. Found proved. In reaching its decision that you subjected this child to the program of investigations, the panel noted that no clinician at the Royal Free had seen the child at outpatients prior to her admission. Your letter to Child 8's mother, dated December 3, 1996 stated, I have had documentation concerning Child 8 and I have heard that you would like us to go ahead with the investigations. I have arranged for her to be admitted, the colonoscopy will be the next day, other investigations will be arranged during the week. Do you caused Child 8 to undergo a colonoscopy? Found proved. 3 barium meal and follow through. Found proved. Which was not clinically indicated. Found proved. The panel considered that there were minimal GI symptoms to warrant a colonoscopy at that stage. It also noted your own evidence, Day 94b32, that if a colonoscopy was not clinically indicated, then the barium meal and follow-through is not. J. Your conduct as set out above was contrary to the clinical interests of Child 8. Found proved on the basis of the above findings. 130 Child 8's case contained a significant feature, potentially adverse to Professor Walker-Smith, that he had arranged for her admission for investigations without first assessing her, or causing her to be assessed by another consultant, at an outpatient's clinic. Given the elapse of time since her admission and the fact that he did not see her or her mother on any occasion, it is unsurprising that his recollection of circumstances was imperfect. There must have been some reason for his departure from normal practice, and the reasons that he gave were not outlandish. Ideally, the panel should have said whether it rejected them and, if so, why. Nevertheless, the panel were entitled to take the unusual arrangements for admission into account, without doing so expressly. If there had been a number of other similar instances, this pattern of admission would have been cogent evidence of a research purpose for the admissions. It is, however, the only instance in which this occurred which can be laid at the door of Professor Walker-Smith. By itself, it is no more than one piece of evidence to support the GMC's case and cannot make up for the identified deficiencies in the panel's reasoning on the remainder of the case. 131 The finding at 2.1d is, as in the other cases, vitiated by the lack of evidence that Dr. Miller's view was out with the spectrum of reasonable medical opinion and the panel's failure to deal with his evidence. His view that there were clear gastrointestinal and behavioral symptoms warranting a colonoscopy cannot simply be dismissed by stating that the symptoms were minimal in the view of the non-expert panel. The specific reference to Professor Walker-Smith's evidence that if a colonoscopy was not clinically indicated, then the barium meal and follow-through is not is puzzling. It is the only reference to Professor Walker-Smith's oral evidence in the findings related to the Lancet children. The natural expectation is that it would be significant and referable to this child. The point was, however, freely conceded and common ground in the cases of all of the Lancet children. It is a minor instance of the panel fixing on an insignificant bit of evidence to support a finding, when the evidence which had to be analyzed to do so was not. 132 The finding at 2.1j stands or falls with the other findings and adds nothing to them. Child 7. 133 Because no finding of serious professional misconduct was made in relation to Child 7 except that he was admitted for the purpose of unapproved research, his case can be dealt with shortly. 134 Child 7 was born on February 24, 1994 and was the brother of Child 6. Before his first birthday, he suffered what was noted in his general practice records as partial complex seizures. An EEG performed in June 1995 revealed abnormality in the right frontal to central region of his brain. MMR vaccine was given in November 1995. By March 1996, his general practitioner was noting that he had problems of constipation, with occasional blood and abdominal pain. He was referred to the Royal Alexandra Hospital. On July 2, 1996, Dr. Trounce told his general practitioner Dr. Nal Tambi that the abnormality detected on the original EEG might have misled the clinicians into a diagnosis of epilepsy. 135 On October 5, 1996 Dr. Nal Tambi spoke to Professor Walker-Smith asking him to see Child 7. He said that he probably did not have autism, but did have convulsions which I believe may make him eligible for your study and bowel problems similar to those of his brother. Professor Walker-Smith arranged for an outpatient appointment, which took place on January 15, 1997. The clinical history taken by Professor Walker-Smith included a note that at 2 years he had blood and constipation which alternated with diarrhea and mucus. On the same day, he wrote to Dr. Berlowitz stating that he was a sibling of Child 6 who is already in our protocol and that although there were autistic features, his general practitioner had not referred the child for full investigation. On January 17, 1997 Professor Walker-Smith wrote to Dr. Nal Tambi, noting the gastrointestinal symptoms identified in his clinical notes. He concluded that in view of the findings in his brother, it would be appropriate for Child 7 to be investigated particularly by colonoscopy. He said he would have other investigations as part of the protocol. 136 Child 7 was admitted on January 26, 1997. The admission clerking note written by Dr. Dixon, a senior house officer, gave as the purpose of admission, colonoscopy, and investigations as part of disintegrative disorder/colitis study. He noted severe constipation and blood and alternating mucus and diarrhea, with blood, currently diarrhea. Dr. Thompson's colonoscopy report of January 27, 1997 noted slight evidence of vascular abnormality in the rectum and sigmoid colon and a marked degree of lymphonodular hyperplasia in the terminal ileum. Barium meal and follow-through revealed small filling defects in the terminal ileum, consistent with lymphoid nodular hyperplasia. On Professor Walker-Smith's ward round on January 30, 1997, an anti-inflammatory was suggested and, if biopsy showed inflammation, lactulose. The histology report dated January 31, 1997 revealed no significant histological abnormality. Although child 7 was discharged on February 1, 1997, Dr. Cassin's discharge letter was not sent until May 19, 1997. In the interim, he had been seen at his outpatients clinic on April 16, 1997 by Professor Walker-Smith, who suggested a change in the anti-inflammatory medicine previously prescribed. Dr. Cassin's discharge letter did no more than recite the procedures which had been undertaken, the results already noted and the medication prescribed by Professor Walker-Smith. Dr. Berlowitz wrote to Professor Walker-Smith on June 3, 1997 stating his diagnosis of developmental disorder, somewhere between Asperger's and autism. Professor Walker-Smith saw child 7 on several further occasions between 1997 and 1999 and exchanged correspondence with his general practitioner. 137 There was no allegation that the colonoscopy, barium meal, and follow-through and lumbar puncture performed on child 7 were not clinically indicated. Charge 23 grams did allege that Professor Walker-Smith's conduct was contrary to his clinical interests, but the panel found that not proved, because there was evidence that the investigations were clinically indicated and were therefore in child 7's clinical interests. The only material allegation was that contained in 2.3a. You subjected child 7 to a program of investigations as part of the project referred to a paragraphs 2b and 2c above. Found proved. The panel is persuaded by the evidence, in particular your letter dated January 17, 1997 to the child's GP, and copied to Dr. Wakefield, which states he will be having other investigations as part of the protocol, together with the admission clerking notes in the Royal Free Hospital notes, which record that the child is undergoing colonoscopy and investigations as part of the disintegrative disorder/colitis study, and under the heading plan it states autism protocol. The panel went on to find that the investigations were undertaken without the approval of the ethics committee because he did not meet the inclusion criteria, that he had been given MMR vaccine, not measles or measles/rubella vaccine, and had not been diagnosed with disintegrative disorder. 138 Professor Walker-Smith's answer was that he did not admit child 7 under Project 172-96 because that project was never undertaken. The notes made by other clinicians on which the panel based its finding in paragraph 2.3a suggest that they had a different understanding. Two conclusions were possible: that Professor Walker-Smith had failed to make his intentions clear to other members of his clinical team, once ethics committee approval for 172-96 had been given, or that he did intend that child 7 should be admitted under the project, but failed to appreciate that his case did not fit within the confines of the admission criteria, if strictly construed. Given the panel's finding that the procedures were clinically indicated and in the clinical interests of child 7, the second possibility, which is what the panel appears to have found, was open to it. It then had to consider the significance of this finding. The only ground upon which it found that the investigations lacked ethics committee approval was that child 7 did not meet the inclusion criteria because he had had MMR vaccination and had not been diagnosed with disintegrative disorder. Those findings were correct, but could not have justified a finding of serious professional misconduct. As far as I know, the reason for including the first criterion has never been explained. The second was treated by gastroenterologists in the clinical team as shorthand for a disorder on the autistic spectrum. All that these, repeated, errors established were that Dr. Wakefield used inaccurate words to describe the conditions which he was investigating, which Professor Walker-Smith did not correct. Child 10. 139 because the panel made no finding of serious professional misconduct in relation to child 10, except that he was admitted for the purpose of unapproved research and in relation to transfer factor, which I deal with separately below, his case, too, can be dealt with shortly. 140 Child 10 was born on February 17, 1993. MMR vaccine was given on February 21, 1994. On October 26, 1994, Child 10's mother wrote to Dr. Thomas, his general practitioner, stating that he showed signs of some of the same problems as his sibling. On May 1, 1995, Dr. Davis, a consultant community pediatrician at University Hospital Cardiff, wrote to Dr. Thomas, setting out a full behavioral history, and stating that Child 10 had a number of features characteristic of autism, but that he was not in the autistic range. 141 On October 14, 1996, Dr. Hopkins, Child 10's general practitioner, referred him to Professor Walker-Smith. He gave a brief history of his condition. Professor Walker-Smith replied on October 29, 1996, saying that he would be delighted to see Child 10 at his outpatient clinic. He did so on November 8, 1996. He noted that Dr. Davis had found a high measles antibody and low iron in 1995 and that he now hopped, screamed, and clutched his stomach and had episodes of watery diarrhea up to 5 times a day. Professor Walker-Smith wrote to Dr. Hopkins on November 11, 1996, identifying those symptoms and stating that the parents were keen that he should be investigated for possible gastrointestinal disease. He thought that account needed to be taken of the high measles antibody. 142 Child 10 was admitted on February 16, 1997. Dr. Casson made his usual full clinical note, which included reference to deterioration, pulling his knees up and clutching his abdomen in summer 1996 and his lack of bowel control. The reason given in the endoscopy clerking sheet of the same date for the procedure was high measles antibody, autistic clutches abdomen, inflammatory bowel disease. The endoscopy report of February 16, 1997 noted prominent lymphoid follicles in the colon, erythematous granular mucosa around a swollen ileocecal valve and minor inflammatory changes and striking lymph nodular hyperplasia in the terminal ileum. Dr. Murch's colonoscopy report of February 17, 1997 revealed clear abnormalities. This colonoscopy was definitely abnormal, in probably a more striking example of the pattern seen in the cohort of the autistic children. The rectum showed definite mild abnormality, with a slightly granular mucosa and abnormal vascular pattern. Prominent lymphoid follicles could be seen throughout colon, with no other mucosal abnormality. The cecum showed an erythematous, granular mucosa around a swollen ileocecal valve, while the terminal ileum showed minor inflammatory change and striking lymphoid hyperplasia distally. I suspect that the biopsies will show unequivocal abnormality. Perhaps surprisingly, the first undated histology report did not. A second report dated February 19, 1997 found minor abnormalities, confluent lymphoid aggregates in the biopsy of the ileum and a very subtle scattering of chronic inflammatory cells within the lamina propria in the large bowel. A lumbar puncture was performed on the February 17, 1997. Child 10 was seen by Dr. Berlowitz on February 18, 1997, who diagnosed an encephalitic episode which led to some low-grade generalized brain damage. Dr. Casson's discharge summary dated March 17, 1997 recited the procedures and their results and recommended anti-inflammatory medication. 143 The panel found, in paragraph 25A of its determination, that Professor Walker-Smith had subjected Child 10 to a program of investigations to further Project 172-96. Its reasons referred to the introduction to the clerking notes, already cited, and 2 letters from other practitioners, Dr. Davis, at the University Hospital Cardiff, who had written to Professor Walker-Smith on February 6, 1997 with a description of the investigations undertaken by his team and concluding, I would be interested to know your findings and look forward to the outcome of the research in due course, and in Dr. Barilowitz's letter to Professor Walker-Smith of 20th February 1997, in which he stated his diagnosis, that child 10's father had said that his mother would not wish to participate in a research interview. The panel found that child 10 did not meet the inclusion criteria for Project 172-96, because he had been vaccinated with MMR and did not manifest disintegrative disorder. It was invited to find that the colonoscopy and lumbar puncture were not clinically indicated, but declined to do so, on the basis that there was insufficient evidence to support the charge in relation to the colonoscopy and because it accepted the evidence of Dr. Thomas that lumbar puncture was clinically indicated. It also found that Professor Walker-Smith's conduct was not contrary to the clinical interests of child 10, because there was insufficient evidence to make that finding. 144 The significance of the panel's findings to the overall case against Professor Walker-Smith is the same as in the case of child 7. Conclusions to be drawn from the panel's findings in the Lancet Children's cases. 145 The panel repeatedly laid emphasis upon the circumstances in which each child was admitted for the investigations and the terms of the contemporaneous letters, in particular those from Professor Walker-Smith, leading to admission. This was a legitimate approach and led the panel to discern a pattern in the admissions, that each child was admitted to undertake a standardized program of investigations, which were, with some exceptions, carried out. What the panel's stated reasons do not do, however, is to justify its conclusion that the investigations were for the purposes of Project 172-96 and not for the purpose of a developing clinical project. The panel had to decide whether, as the GMC contended, the admissions were to fulfill a research program and began when the protocol for that program was settled, or that Dr. Wakefield began his research when the clinical team had reached sufficient agreement on a clinical protocol for children with gastrointestinal and behavioral disorders to permit them to proceed. The terms of the letters and Dr. Wakefield's participation in referrals do not, by themselves, provide the answer to that question. That required a deeper and more careful analysis than it appears to have received from the panel. 146 Both sides rightly focused on the early admissions, children 1, 2, and 3. Careful analysis of their history does not support the panel's finding. Child 1, the first to be admitted, was only admitted after Professor Walker-Smith had changed his provisional diagnosis as a result of an abnormal blood test result. Child 2 was only subjected to neurological tests after Dr. Thompson had checked with Dr. Surtees, at Great Ormond Street, that the tests were appropriate, and what they were intended to reveal or exclude, which included metabolic disorder. Project 172-96 only proposed testing for measles virus. Child 3's case was the only one which was consistent with the GMC's contention. 147 There were further significant anomalies in the cases of Child 6 and Child 12, for the reasons explained in paragraphs 80 and 119 of this judgment. 148 The fact that there are 4 anomalous cases out of 10, or 11 if the case of Child 4 is included, should have given the panel pause for thought and did require an explanation for their conclusion that all of the children were admitted for the purpose of research. The detailed findings of the panel in the cases of the individual children did not fill the obvious gaps in its general conclusions. In no case did it address the indications in the medical notes which supported the oral evidence of the clinicians that they were undertaking a program of diagnostic and therapeutic investigations, not research, or give adequate reasons for rejecting that account in the case of each individual child. 149 Further, the panel's finding of serious professional misconduct in respect of the Lancet children was principally founded on its conclusion that in 7 of the 10 cases in which it found Professor Walker-Smith at serious fault, he subjected the children to investigations which were not clinically indicated and were contrary to their clinical interests. It is not obvious from its decision that if the investigations were clinically indicated, a finding of serious professional misconduct would have been made, or justified. Its findings were as follows. The children described in the Lancet paper were admitted for research purposes under a program of investigations for Project 172-96, the purpose of which was to investigate a postulated new syndrome following vaccination. The panel rejected Professor Walker-Smith's contention that Project 172-96 was never undertaken. It found that Professor Walker-Smith, in an application for Project 172-96, to the Royal Free Hospital Ethics Committee, was named as a responsible consultant and thereby took on the shared responsibility for the research governance of the application, for ensuring that only children meeting the inclusion criteria would be admitted, that conditions attached to the Ethics Committee approval would be complied with, and that the children would be treated in accordance with the terms of the approval given. The panel also concluded in accordance with expert evidence that responsible consultants who sign up to research are individually responsible and have a duty to ensure such research governance. In respect of Child 2, 1, 3, 6, 9, 5, 12, 8, 7, and 10, the panel found that Professor Walker-Smith subjected them to investigations as part of Project 172-96, a research project, without Ethics Committee approval, thus without the ethical constraints which safeguard research. The panel further found that the investigations carried out on Child 2, 1, 3, 9, 5, 12, and 8 were contrary to his representations to the Ethics Committee that they were clinically indicated. Ethical considerations are there to protect research subjects, to reassure the public, and they are crucial to the public's trust in research medicine. The conditions for approval for Project 172-96 and the inclusion criteria for it were not complied with, and thus the expectations of the Ethics Committee and their reliance on the probity of Professor Walker-Smith as a responsible consultant were not met. In respect of the clinical care of the children, Professor Walker-Smith assessed 9 of the Lancet children in the outpatients clinic, prior to admission, and all 11 children were admitted to hospital under his clinical care. The public is entitled to expect that patients entrusted to the clinical care of a doctor will be treated in accordance with their best clinical interests. With regard to Child 2, 1, 3, 9, 5, 12, and 8, Professor Walker-Smith caused all 7 of them to undergo colonoscopies that were not clinically indicated. In respect of Child 2, 1, 3, 9, 5, 12, and 8, Professor Walker-Smith caused all 7 to undergo barium meals and follow-throughs which were not clinically indicated. In respect of Child 3 and 9, Professor Walker-Smith caused these 2 children to undergo lumbar punctures which were not clinically indicated. In respect of Child 4, 9, 12, and 8, Professor Walker-Smith failed to record in the medical records the basis upon which their histological diagnoses were changed. He also failed to record the reason for a prescription in respect of Child 8, when the clinical histology report did not indicate a need for this medication. Good medical practice emphasizes the need to record accurate and contemporaneous clinical findings and keep other colleagues well informed when sharing the care of patients. The panel considered that this was a failing on Professor Walker-Smith's part which could lead to confusion in respect of the children's subsequent treatment. In respect of 7 of the Lancet children, 2, 1, 3, 9, 5, 12 and 8, Professor Walker-Smith's conduct was contrary to their clinical interests. The panel is concerned that Professor Walker-Smith repeatedly breached the fundamental principles of research and clinical medicine. It concluded that his actions in these areas were sufficient to amount to serious professional misconduct. 150 It is in its findings on the clinical issues in the individual cases of the Lancet children that the most numerous and significant inadequacies and errors in the determination of the panel occur. In no individual case in which the panel made a finding adverse to Professor Walker-Smith did it address the expert evidence led for him, except to misstate it. The issues to which this evidence went were of fundamental importance to the case against him. Universal inadequacies and some errors in the panel's determination accordingly go to the heart of the case. They are not curable. Unless the remainder of the panel's findings justify its conclusion that Professor Walker-Smith was guilty of serious professional misconduct, its determination cannot stand. The Lancet paper. 151 The results of the investigations into the Lancet children were written up in a paper published in The Lancet on February 28, 1988. Dr. Wakefield and Professor Walker-Smith were placed first and last in the list of authors. There was an arcane dispute about whether that meant that Professor Walker-Smith was a senior author, the main result of which was to permit the panel to acquit Dr. Murch of serious professional misconduct on charges arising out of the publication of the Lancet paper because, given that his name appeared second, he was not a senior author. For the purposes of Professor Walker-Smith's case, all that really matters is that he was identified in the first footnote to the paper as the senior clinical investigator. On any view, he carried substantial responsibility for the contents and accuracy of the paper. 152 It was drafted by Dr. Wakefield and circulated amongst the clinicians in July 1997. Its contents were also discussed by Dr. Wakefield in an interview with the general practice magazine Pulse. This prompted the two letters from Professor Walker-Smith to Dr. Wakefield noted in paragraph 19(6) of this judgment. It also prompted Dr. Berlowitz to write to Professor Walker-Smith on August 5, 1997. He stated that he would like to be sure that two issues were emphasized. First, because the onset of autism and disintegrative disorder always occurs at the end of the first year of life, no causal connection between vaccination and autism could yet be drawn. Secondly, general practitioners and the general public should not draw strong conclusions from the paper about whether or not children should be vaccinated against measles. Finally, he proposed that the title should be amended, to substitute developmental disorder for regressive behavioral disorder. The draft upon which he was commenting was almost certainly an undated draft headed A New Syndrome, Regressive Developmental Disorder Associated with Ileocolonic Lymphonodular Hyperplasia, Nonspecific Colitis, and Immunodeficiency. The text of this draft included the following. Conclusions of clinical study: we have identified significant gastrointestinal pathology in association with developmental regression in a selected group of previously, apparently normal children. In the majority there was a clear temporal association with possible environmental triggers. Anecdotally, children who were subsequently treated with standard therapy for inflammatory bowel disease had a mild marked improvement in both behavioral and intestinal symptoms. Conclusion: the data are not proof of a causal association between measles virus and this syndrome, however, they are significantly provocative to merit further detailed study, in particular, to either establish or refute the possible association with MMR vaccine. Ethical approval: approval for these studies has been granted by the Ethical Practices Committee of the Royal Free Hampstead NHS Trust. Dr. Berlowitz's comments appear to have been reflected in all subsequent drafts and in the final published article. The next draft was headed Ileolymphoid Hyperplasia, Nonspecific Colitis, and Developmental Disorder in Children, A New Syndrome. A passage which dealt with the possible causal link with MMR vaccine stated, "It is important to note that the present study does constitute proof of an association between MMR and the syndrome described. Detailed virological studies are underway that may help to resolve this issue. If there is a causal link with the MMR, then a rising incidence might be anticipated following its introduction in 1988. Despite an impression of a rise in autistic spectrum disorders, published data are inadequate to determine whether there is a rising incidence or a link with MMR. The diagnosis of autism is usually made on symptoms starting in the first year of life, when children receive MMR. Despite the striking temporal association with MMR in many of these children, this factor must be taken into consideration when examining the apparent association described." This draft contained a revised form of words about ethical approval. This clinical investigation has been approved by the Ethical Practices Committee of the Royal Free Hospital NHS Trust. 153 Professor Walker-Smith gave unchallenged evidence that this was the last draft of the paper which he saw. Dr. Murch said, again in unchallenged evidence, that there was then a meeting attended by all of the researchers and clinicians involved to discuss the draft, which they approved. At the end of the meeting there was a discussion between Dr. Murch, Professor Walker-Smith, Dr. Thompson, and Dr. Wakefield about the reference to Ethics Committee approval of this clinical investigation, because it was a clinically driven investigation which did not require Ethics Committee approval. Dr. Murch said that Dr. Wakefield had assured them that he would liaise with the Lancet to ensure that appropriate wording was substituted. The wording in the published paper which neither Dr. Murch nor Professor Walker-Smith saw before publication was ethical approval and consent. Investigations were approved by the Ethical Practices Committee of the Royal Free Hospital NHS Trust, and parents gave informed consent. This statement was untrue and should not have been included in the paper. 154. A temporal link between the onset of behavioral problems and MMR vaccination was noted both in the draft seen by Professor Walker-Smith and in the published paper. The draft stated, in 8 cases the onset of behavioral problems had been linked, temporally, with MMR vaccination, either by the parents or by the child's physician. 5 of these 8 had suffered an early adverse event, including rash, fever, delirium and, in 3 cases, convulsions. In those children in whom a precipitating event was reported by the parents, the average interval from exposure to first behavioral symptom was 6.3 days, range 1 to 14 days. Parents were either less clear or unclear about the timing of onset of intestinal features. Firstly, because children had not achieved toilet training at the time that symptoms first appeared, and secondly, because behavioral features indicative of, for example, abdominal pain only became evident to parents with time, since children were unable to communicate symptoms directly. The published paper stated, in 8 children, the onset of behavioral problems had been linked, either by the parents or by the child's physician, with measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination. 5 had had an early adverse reaction to immunization, rash, fever, delirium, and, in 3 cases, convulsions. In these 8 children the average interval from exposure to first behavioral symptoms was 6.3 days, range 1 to 14. Parents were less clear about the timing of onset of abdominal symptoms because children were not toilet trained at the time or because behavioral features made children unable to communicate symptoms. The charges accurately summarized that passage as follows. The Lancet paper purported to identify associated gastrointestinal disease and developmental regression in a group of previously normal children which was generally associated in time with possible environmental triggers which were identified by their parents in 8 cases with the child's MMR vaccination. This paraphrase was admitted and found proved. 155. The panel went on to find that Professor Walker-Smith knew that the reporting of a temporal link between the syndrome described and MMR vaccination had major public health implications and would attract intense public and media interest. Consequently, as a senior author, Professor Walker-Smith had a duty to ensure that the factual information in the paper and any information provided by him in response to queries was true and accurate. Although not formally admitted, there was, and could have been, no real issue about these propositions. It was precisely because Professor Walker-Smith and Dr. Murch were concerned about the public health implications that they wrote the letters to Dr. Wakefield and published the press release referred to in paragraph 7 of this judgment. 156. The panel then made disputed findings on the meaning of a significant part of the paper in paragraphs 29c, I, and 30, 31, and 32. 29. C. In the circumstances set out at paragraph 29b above, i.e. the public health implications of the paper, and as one of the senior authors of the Lancet paper, I knew or ought to have known of the importance of accurately and honestly describing the patient population. Found proved. 30. You failed to state in the Lancet paper that the children whose referral and histories you described were part of a project, the purpose of which was to investigate a postulated new syndrome comprising gastrointestinal symptoms and disintegrative disorder following vaccination. Found proved on the basis that the children who were described in the paper were admitted under a program of investigations under Project 172-96 for research purposes. B. Your conduct as set out at paragraph 30A was I. Dishonest. Found not proved. The panel concluded that your actions were not premeditated and you did not intend to be deliberately dishonest. It noted that you did not write or see the final draft of the paper and considered that you had been naive in your lack of thoroughness regarding the paper submitted to The Lancet. Both sides accept that the reference to naivety was a reference to the conclusion of the panel and not to any evidence given by Professor Walker-Smith. 2. Irresponsible. Found proved. The panel considered that you as a senior author should have checked the validity or otherwise of the paper. You said you were given the second draft but did not see the final one. The panel concluded that your conduct as a senior clinician and senior author was irresponsible. 3. Resulted in a misleading description of the patient population in the Lancet paper. Found proved. 3.1a The Lancet paper stated that the children who were the subject of the paper were consecutively referred to the Department of Pediatric Gastroenterology with a history of a pervasive developmental disorder with loss of acquired skills and intestinal symptoms, diarrhea, abdominal pain, bloating and food intolerance, and subsequently described them as a self-referred group. Admitted and found proved. B. You knew or ought to have known that such a description implied a routine referral to the gastroenterology department in relation to symptoms which included gastrointestinal symptoms. Found proved. 2. A routine process in which the investigators had placed no active part. Found proved. The panel took into account the article in The Lancet, Volume 350, October 4, 1997, writing for The Lancet, it is a general reader whom you are trying to reach. The panel is satisfied that a general reader would interpret the wording in 30A in fact 31A to mean that children were referred to the gastroenterology department with gastrointestinal symptoms and that the investigators had played no active part in that referral. 32A Contrary to paragraph 31B, the referrals of Child 1 as set out at paragraph 6A and 6B. Found proved. 2. Child 9 as set out at paragraphs 14A, 14C. Found proved. 3. Child 5 as set out at paragraphs 16A, 16B. Found proved. 4. Child 10 as set out at paragraphs 24A and 24B. Found proved. Did not constitute routine referrals to the gastroenterology department in relation to intestinal symptoms as the referring doctors referred the children for investigation of the role played by the measles vaccination or the MMR vaccination into their developmental disorders and did not report any history of gastrointestinal symptoms. Having regard to its findings in relation to Child 1, 9, 5, and 10, namely that these children were admitted to undergo a program of investigations for research purposes, and that they all lacked a history of gastrointestinal symptoms, the panel is satisfied that these referrals did not constitute routine referrals to the gastroenterology department. B. Contrary to paragraph 31B, 2, the referrals of Child 2, as set out at paragraph 4E. Found not proved. At the end of the first assessment of the child, you said you would be happy to see the child again should the need arise. The panel accepted that you wrote to Child 2's mother on May 16, 1996, offering to see Child 2 again, in response to her telephone call saying that her child's symptoms had worsened. 2. Child 9, as set out at paragraph 14A. Found proved. The panel is satisfied that your letter to Dr. Spratt the pediatrician, asking if it was appropriate to investigate Child 9 in the protocol, was tantamount to an express invitation for the child to be seen by you. Involved your express invitation for the child to be seen by you. See the description of the referral process in the Lancet paper was therefore irresponsible. Found proved. 2. Misleading. Found proved. 3. Contrary to your duty to ensure that the information in the paper was accurate. Found proved. In reaching its decision, the panel concluded that your description of the referral process as routine when it was not, was irresponsible and misleading and contrary to your duty as a senior author. 157 On the premise that the panel was right to find that the Lancet paper was addressed to the general reader and that it was the interpretation of the general reader which mattered, I am as well qualified as the panel to construe its meaning. Further, I am entitled to and do apply the familiar canon of construction used by judges in construing documents, to read and construe the whole document, not just selected words. Thus construed, this paper does not bear the meaning put upon it by the panel. The phrase consecutively referred means no more than that the children were referred successively, rather than as a single batch, to the Department of Pediatric Gastroenterology. The words did not imply routine referral. The paragraph from which the words "a self-referred group" was taken reads: "We describe a pattern of colitis and ileal lymphoid nodular hyperplasia in children with developmental disorders. Intestinal and behavioral pathologies may have occurred together by chance, reflecting a selection bias in a self-referred group. However, the uniformity of the intestinal pathological changes and the fact that previous studies have found intestinal dysfunction in children with autistic spectrum disorders, suggests that the connection is real and reflects a unique disease process." The general reader of that paragraph would note the author's caution about the possibility of selection bias in the self-referred group. Taken together with the comments already cited made about the temporal coincidence of the onset of symptoms and MMR vaccination in the case of 8 children, the author has made it clear that this was not a routine referral. It was a referral generated by the concerns of parents about a possible link. The statement made by the panel in paragraph 3 to see that it was Professor Walker-Smith who had described the referral process in the Lancet paper as routine was wrong. It put its stretched meaning of the wording of part of the paper into his mouth and then found that it was irresponsible and misleading. This was not a legitimate finding. 158. The findings in paragraphs 3 to a that the referrals of 4 children were not routine because the referring doctors did not mention intestinal symptoms in their referral letters was factually accurate as to the contents of the referral letters, but of no significance. In each case, Professor Walker-Smith elicited gastrointestinal symptoms at his outpatient's clinic. The finding at paragraph 3 to a that all 4 children lacked a history of gastrointestinal symptoms is wrong unless the panel intended only to refer to the contents of the referral letters. The finding in paragraph 32b, 2, was correct, but, on its own, of little significance. The genesis of the referral is explained in paragraphs 81 and 82 of this judgment. The panel's finding that the description of the patient population in the Lancet paper was misleading would only have been justified if its primary finding that all of the Lancet children were referred for the purposes of research as part of Project 172-96 is sustainable. Because, for the reasons which I have given, it was not, this aspect of its findings must also fall. 159. In paragraph 34 of its determination, the panel found that Professor Walker-Smith was irresponsible and in breach of his duty to ensure that the information in the paper was accurate, because it stated that investigations were approved by the Ethics Committee. This finding was justified. Professor Walker-Smith should not have allowed a paper to be published under his name without ensuring its accuracy. Whether or not that amounted to professional misconduct should have depended on the panel's view of the truthfulness and accuracy of the evidence of Dr. Murch about the meeting between him, Professor Walker-Smith, Dr. Thompson and Dr. Wakefield after the discussion between researchers and clinicians of the last draft of the paper seen by Professor Walker-Smith. If it was, Professor Walker-Smith's omission could properly have been characterized as an error of judgment. It was not misconduct for him, Dr. Murch or Dr. Thompson to invite a research colleague, Dr. Wakefield, to correct a misleading statement in the draft and leave it to him to do so. Because the panel made no finding on that issue, its reasoning is inadequate. 160. The panel made one further finding arising out of the Lancet article. In February 2004, Professor Walker-Smith, who had retired from practice in October 2000, was notified that an investigative journalist, Mr. Deere, had made a number of allegations about the Lancet paper, which he had discussed with the editor, Dr. Horton. On February 18, 2004, Dr. Wakefield, Professor Walker-Smith, Dr. Murch and Dr. Harvey attended a meeting at the Lancet offices, at which they were invited to provide a written response to the allegations for the Lancet. A meeting was convened next day by the Vice-Dean of the medical school at the Royal Free Hospital, Professor Hodgson, who asked them to investigate and respond to the allegations. They had a day in which to do so. Professor Walker-Smith and Dr. Thompson checked the clinical notes obtained from the Royal Free Hospital's records department. Professor Walker-Smith's recollection was that he did not invite any child to participate in the investigations. A written response from Professor Walker-Smith was published in The Lancet for March 6, 2004, confirming that he had reviewed the medical records, that all of the children were investigated specifically and exclusively by clinical need, and that to the best of his recollection he did not invite any children to participate in our study. The panel found that it was not proved that that statement was made dishonestly, but that it was irresponsible in one instance only, that of child 9. It clearly relied on Professor Walker-Smith's letter to Dr. Spratt of September 11, 1996. If that letter had been in the Royal Free Hospital clinical notes, this finding would have been justifiable. In fact, it was not. The panel could not reasonably have found Professor Walker-Smith to have been guilty of professional misconduct for failing to remember the terms of a letter which he had written 7½ years before, but which was omitted from the records which he was able to check. This finding was unjustified.
I don't know who you are.
Good luck.